Hello, and welcome to my spoiler review for Deadpool and Wolverine, a safe space for us to talk about all the goodies in the film. As you see this film, please try not to spoil it for anybody else. If you're excited about the movie, or if for some reason you hate it and want to tear it down, let people have their experience, and then afterwards, we can discuss it in length, as we're doing now. But really try to protect the sanctity of the movie-going experience, particularly for a film like this, which is built for shock and awe, to really surprise and delight its audience, or at least try to. The reaction out of the gate hasn't been enthusiastic across the board. We'll see what the box office and the audience scores end up being. Critics, I'm not sure if maybe the movie's too inside baseball. I said that might maybe end up being an issue for the film in my non-spoiler review. Sometimes people, audiences don't love talking about Hollywood, a lot of them. And then also sometimes, some critics and some people think that it's crass. They're like, but what about the art? And you're like, but it's Deadpool. He always breaks the fourth wall. Of course he would talk about that. He has a movie coming out in the middle of this huge transition from Fox to Disney for these characters. And then also it might just be anger against Disney, expectations set too high. Although I was able to pivot when I saw the movie. We'll talk about that in a moment. But anyway, we'll discuss this, the performance of the film in depth on Movie Math on Sunday. But yes, this is a spoiler review, so you've been warned. All right, here we go. All right, so yes, no other original X-Men from the films showed up. They didn't end up being in the film. And I talked to my source about this. I've had a lot of conversations actually about this movie with my source, but I couldn't share them with you because I didn't want to spoil the film. But anyway, it seems that the OG X-Men were included, which is why I reported it, in earlier versions of the script. And it just didn't pan out. In fact, those versions not only included the TVA as well, but also Kang. And obviously that's currently, an issue for the MCU. Now my source on this had told me that there were no OG X-Men in the film weeks ago. And in fact, I knew there weren't a lot of cameos overall. And that's why I tweeted this poll on July 8th. I couldn't say anything, but I was trying to give you like a discreet heads up, and to my surprise, the vast majority of you answered that you didn't actually care about the cameos. And so I was like, that's good news for this movie. But how do you feel now? Was that just talk? Now that you've actually seen the film and you see the number of cameos they actually ended up having. I think it works because it's primarily a Deadpool and Wolverine film. And I think some of the cameos are excellent. And I think that they carry the day because of that. They're not only excellent, but they're extended. I loved Gambit. I thought that was great. We have a lot to talk about. Now, to me, as I just said, I liked the movie because it ended up being such a heartfelt and effective celebration of Wolverine, who I'm a big fan of. And then also Deadpool. I think Deadpool, while he's been wonderful in his previous films, felt the most Deadpool-y he's ever felt in this film. I was like, wow, that is very Deadpool. That was excellent. And it ended up not being a celebration of the Fox Marvel movies, which would have been very expensive, although this movie ended up being very expensive anyway. It does make me wonder, though, that maybe these two, Hugh Jackman's Wolverine and Ryan Reynolds' Deadpool, might end up being the only Fox Marvel characters to make the jump to the MCU, as they literally do in this movie. And after seeing this movie, I think that I would be okay with that. I think that if those other characters were going to show up, this was the place to do it. And it didn't happen. So I think it's good to move on. And I'd be fine putting Hugh Jackman with other versions of the X-Men. I think that's fine. How do you feel about it? I'm okay with it. Blade, by the way, was a New Line, aka Warner Brothers release. And I was surprised, but also not surprised, that Wesley Snipes planted his flag so aggressively in the character. When, they were talking about, how many Punishers have there been? Like 5 or 6? And I was like, have there been? But then before I could think about it, Wesley Snipes' Blade says, there is only ever going to be one Blade. And I was like, what? That is a wild comment considering the very unusual delays in the Mahershala Ali MCU version of the character. So it's a very funny line, but also you're like, shots fired. It was a very aggressive line. Like, it was funny, but I wouldn't be laughing if I was Mahershala Ali, particularly because his film is not moving forward. And I'm surprised that Kevin Feige allowed the line, because he's like, dude, why you gotta create more problems for me? All right, so anyway, but that is very Deadpool. Now, I'm going to make a whole nother video that focuses specifically on the cameos. We're going to talk about them a little bit here, but we'll really go into them in depth on the other video. So with this one, I want to talk about story, really get into the main characters, their motivations, what we learn about them, and then, of course, talk about the beautiful action sequences. And that's how we're going to... the action sequences are going to be our framework for this discussion, because that's the gravy, baby. That famous or infamous, depending on how you feel about this Steven Soderbergh famous story that I've mentioned many times, might dictate how you feel about Deadpool and Wolverine. I've seen some criticism that it's too corporate, too commercial, but I mean, hopefully that means it will perform very well as a product. But anyway, of course, that famous or infamous story about Steven Soderbergh being at the airport and seeing this guy who was like in the target demographic for Hollywood, right? Like mid-30s. And he was watching, I believe it was, what was it? Like Civil War, I think, is the story. And so he was watching the movie and he was just not watching the actual film. He was just fast forwarding from action sequence to action sequence. And, everybody might be like, that's disgusting. But Civil War and the movies that followed it, also from the Russo brothers, were incredibly successful. And now that they're no longer following that same formula, not as much. So I think it was smart for Deadpool and Wolverine to have all these wonderful action sequences throughout the film, because I could definitely see myself watching the film in that way sometimes. Because they're just, the kind that if somebody posts it, after the movie's had its run on social media, you stop in your timeline and you actually watch it because you're like, good times. And they're very well done. I think the action sequences in this film are excellent. All right, so I counted 6 action sequences in the film overall, and we're going to go through them in order. So, like the 2 other Deadpool movies, our opening credit sequence is an action scene with plenty of props to write the credits on. The first Deadpool was that like highway car chase-esque sequence, right? The second Deadpool was a James Bond style opening, which was very funny. And here it's Deadpool using Logan's adamantium skeleton, which he digs up from the grave from Logan, versus the TVA officers, right? To the tune of NSYNC's Bye Bye Bye. And as it's been already pointed out, I've seen that song came out in 2000, which is the exact same year that the first X-Men movie came out. So that's fun. I mean, the sequence is fun all by itself, but that puts a little cherry on top of it. To me, what really sold the scene, and in addition to the sweet action and camera moves, was Deadpool himself doing the NSYNC dance moves. That let me know that we were here to party. And I thought it was so funny. But it was great, not only because he was doing them, but Deadpool was doing the dance moves so well. I'm not sure if that was actually Ryan Reynolds or a dance double, but his moves were on point. I was like, wow, that's incredible. Like, I think another comedian or any number of comedians might have been tempted to do this dance poorly. But what made it funny was that Deadpool was doing it so well. It was great. It was really, really good. Also, this scene is important to the movie overall because it establishes that Logan is canon, which I think if they'd undid Logan, it would have upset a lot of fans. So the Fox Wolverine did sacrifice himself. And that's actually the catalyst for this entire film. I think this could have been set up a little bit better because I only really put it together while I was doing my notes for the spoiler breakdown, and it's even more clever than I thought when I was watching the film. All right, so the Fox Wolverine was the anchor being for the Fox universe. And without him, the Fox universe can no longer exist, which is very meta Hollywood humor, right? I mean, that's very funny. It's like, we can't keep this universe around because it doesn't have Hugh Jackman's Wolverine in it anymore. So Paradox, making like a Hollywood executive, or perhaps more accurately, James Gunn versus the Snyderverse, that's so funny, would rather put the entire universe out of its misery right now rather than just letting it, not addressing it and letting it slowly die out. So that's hilarious. And Paradox, again, like a Hollywood executive, does notice that Deadpool has some value. So he gives him the opportunity to jump ship to the MCU before he destroys the Fox universe, before Paradox destroys the Fox universe. I think that's very, very clever. And perhaps the movie should have made it a little bit more clear that that's what they were doing. And in fact, the TVA acting sort of like the suits at Marvel Studios, instead of that weird, very unfunny Kevin robot that they put in She-Hulk, I think could be a clever, more focused way to use the TVA. But again, maybe it's too inside baseball. As we've also often discussed, it turns out that the majority of audiences aren't interested in what's going on in Hollywood because movies and shows about Hollywood, no matter how good they are, rarely do well. So again, I think that could be, even what they do have here could be potentially like one speed bump for this movie, if there is one. We'll see. We're still going to see how it performs. But I loved it. I love Hollywood business talk. I was like Marvel's The Offer. I was having a great time. All right. So I also liked when they later came back to this fight and they revisited it after, because the end credit, they did the opening credit sequence and they were like, how did I get here? Exposition, which was good because the movie was kind of slow for the first like 20, 30 minutes. So they had that big action sequence out of the gate to lock you in, or at least it locked me in. So they came back to the fight and, Deadpool threw one of his katana blades on the ground and it quickly ricocheted up right into that TVA guy. And that was a really cool move. My whole audience was like, ooh, damn. And it was great. All right. Next action sequence, Deadpool using, the TVA device that he stole from Paradox, going universe hopping to find another Wolverine to replace the one that his world lost. Now, this to me was one of my two favorite sequences in the entire film. And let's see if you can guess what my other one was. It's pretty easy to guess because it's the best sequence in the film. But, if you can guess my other favorite sequence before we get to it. So this was one of my two, again, favorite sequences. I just loved it. I nerded out hardcore as a comic book fan. Maybe if you're not a comic book fan, you would understand how special this sequence is. It made me relate to those of you who are Super Mario fans. I was like, wait a minute. Maybe someone who isn't a Wolverine fan would react to this film the way I reacted to Super Mario Brothers because I'm not a Super Mario fan. But I'm a huge Wolverine fan. And I was like, oh my God, this was incredible. So Hugh Jackman was all the Wolverines, right? Except one, which was Henry Cavill. And it was a very short cameo, but Cavill looked and sounded fantastic. He was great. And I love Deadpool's line about, oh my God, it is Henry Cavill. We will treat you so much better than the guys down the street. I thought that was so fun. It was great. It was just enough Henry Cavill, in my opinion. I really liked it. But what really, because you don't want him to take over the movie, but what really sold me, and as soon as I saw it, I was like, that's it. The movie's great. Was Age of Apocalypse Wolverine. You don't understand. Let me explain to you. The comic books, okay, I got into comic books reading Batman and X-Men. And my very first X-Men storyline, or one of the first ones, the one that really made me be like, this is great. This is where I want to be, was Age of Apocalypse, which was a storyline that ran for I think a whole year. That's the way you do a crossover comic book event. The only other it's one of the greatest crossover events I've ever read. It would be that and Blackest Night are the two best crossover events I've ever read. And neither one of them has ever been adapted. Secret Invasion was good, but it still wasn't as good as these two. Neither one of these has ever been adapted into live action. We've been doing this for decades now, and they still haven't gotten to these amazing, amazing events. Anyway, so to see Age of Apocalypse referenced and given acknowledgement in this broader space just made me so proud. I was like, oh, my baby, that's my baby up there. I loved it. I love Age of Apocalypse so much. And Hugh Jackman looks so good. And the fact that they brought that into this, it just made me so happy. All right, so I loved all the deep cuts here. Patch, seeing Wolverine in his original brown suit. My audience went nuts for that in particular. I don't think as many of them read Age of Apocalypse as myself, but they were loving that. The brown suit. Too bad they couldn't afford to have brown suit Wolverine really fight Hulk for a minute or so. We just saw the back of Hulk's head. You're like, come on, give us a couple blows, but they didn't. But still, it was very cool to see. During this whole sequence, my audience was just you could hardly hear some of the dialogue. People were just like, oh my God. And then also, tiny comics accurate Wolverine. Little Hugh Jackman looked fake as hell, but I think that was part of the joke. And this tight little black, V-neck, disco douche kind of look. Oh, it was fantastic. And, Deadpool was like, oh, look at little comics accurate Wolverine. You're adorable. And then comics accurate little Wolverine hopped off his bar stool and he was so tiny. I loved it. And it also kind of sold you on how ridiculous that is. And, maybe they could make it work, but this was a strong argument against it, but it was fantastic. But just the love and respect for Wolverine in the comics was palpable. I mean, it was unlike anything we've ever gotten, not only from the Fox Marvel movies, but I would even say we haven't even got anything at this level from, the MCU movies. Only X-Men 97 has done this kind of comic book love, also for X-Men. Oh, and I just loved it. Thank you to Ryan Reynolds, Hugh Jackman, and Sean Levy for that. All right, then Deadpool and Wolverine. There were some other Wolverines, and we'll go over it in the cameo video, but those were the big ones. The other one was the Wolverine on the cross, of course. I don't think I actually ever read that storyline, which is maybe why I was like, oh, I intellectually recognize that still, but I care about the other Wolverines more. All right, so anyway, Deadpool and Wolverine round 1. This was largely the footage they've used to promote the film, so we saw most of this, except for one move, which I loved. And that was the opening move when Wolverine decided to crawl towards Deadpool like a feral Wolverine, but yet somehow still looked cool doing it. Like when I describe it, you're probably like, ooh, that must look awful. No, it looked amazing. So I was loving that. It looked so cool. It was great. But then, of course, their fight was interrupted when they ran into Cassandra Nova's crew, or actually Cassandra Nova's crew ran into them. And who joined Deadpool and Wolverine? None other than Chris Evans, but not as Captain America, as Johnny Storm. To see this leak, I knew all the cameos going in, and I didn't want to ruin them for you. But to see them in the context, I didn't totally know the context and how they happened. That was great. So anyway, Chris Evans is Johnny Storm. This was funny. We'll talk about, it was funny, but it was good. I liked it. I thought it was, it was a meaty cameo. But anyway, we'll talk about that more in depth in the cameo video. But all I want to say here is that when he wants to, my goodness, Chris Evans can still look very much like a movie star. He looked excellent here. I was like, wow. He and Reynolds are obviously close because Chris Evans also had a cameo in Free Guy, as you might recall, which was also very effective. And we all know that Chris Evans can be very funny. Captain America was a very serious role, but yet he's actually a very good comedian. And it was nice to see him be able to have some fun again. The post-credit scene where it's revealed that he actually did trash talk Cassandra Nova, because, during the movie, we just thought Deadpool was, setting him up to get the blame off of him and Wolverine. And Wolverine's like, what are you doing? You're going to get that guy killed. Although, what was Wolverine doing when you think about it? I guess Wolverine was like, don't be a snitch. But we saw that Chris Evans as Johnny Storm really was talking, trash talking Cassandra Nova behind her back. And that was fun because not only was it funny, but it reminded me of Chris Evans's, role in Knives Out, where he also could really, deliver a diss. So that was great. All right, now let's take a little break, a side detour to talk about Cassandra Nova. There's like one comic book panel where she puts her fingers in some dude's head, and this movie just decided to really run with it. Even giving Emma Corrin these crazy long fingers, prosthetic fingers, which I actually liked. And the pink purple nails that she had, visually, it was very interesting. I was like, oh, that's cool, that's cool. But wow, was Cassandra Nova overpowered. In fact, the only reason that in this movie that anyone ever survived a confrontation with her was because she allowed it. And luckily, she wanted to stay in the void. And she only fed Alioth because Alioth demanded the rent. So after she skinned Johnny Storm alive with a flick of her hand, he had his eyeballs blink for a minute there. I don't know how he still had eyelids. Did he have eyelids? It was crazy. We were just all in shock. And then he, just a flick of her hand, and then he collapsed in a puddle of guts and bones. But after that, I guess they had to make her a little cuckoo and erratic to explain why she just didn't immediately just kill everyone around her. In some ways, they actually kind of made her a bit like the Collector, digging through the TVA's trash to put together her own set of misfits. Although they never really explained why she wanted that. They also didn't explain that, lucky for Wolverine, she was really enamored with the idea of getting a Wolverine for herself, because apparently they rarely, if ever, get pruned. But none of this was explained. And maybe that's a hang-up for some of you. But the movie was moving at such a fast pace and giving me so many goodies that I didn't care. I was like, whatever, I get it. All right, I will say, though, that it's shocking that yet another MCU villain does not make it past a single movie. I mean, they have to understand at Marvel Studios at this point that it's become a running gag for them and not like, laughter at their expense. They gotta let some of these villains stick around, even if they are ridiculously overpowered. All right, so Deadpool and Wolverine managed to escape. I mean, it didn't make any sense how they escaped, but I liked how they kind of like tutted across the screen before crashing into that mountainside. That was very funny. I like that. But anyway, they decide to go looking for the resistance fighters that they heard of. And they get into an argument in a Honda. We'll talk about Nice Pool. I loved Nice Pool. I thought Nice Pool was good. But anyway, and he Dogpool is Nice Pool's dog. And then Deadpool's like, can I have your dog if anything happens to you? And Nice Pool's like, what do you think's going to happen to me? Oh, so funny. All right, so it turns out the reason they got into a fight, Deadpool and Wolverine, is that it turns out that Deadpool made an educated wish. What a great line. I can see people using that. If this movie was really successful, I can see people using it. But unfortunately, we're in the, some people hate everything that Disney does, even if it's good stage, and maybe people will just ignore it. But educated wish is a great concept. So he made an educated wish that the TVA could help this Wolverine fix his past mistakes. So it wasn't even an educated guess. It was an educated wish. And I thought that was very funny. Although I did think the reasoning for why the TVA would not help Wolverine, great cameo from Loki, was that those things made him who he was today. And if he didn't go through those experiences, he wouldn't have saved this world. And I guess the TVA has to make those kinds of arguments because then I guess they could say, well, Deadpool, you need some personal growth. So we now need to, I guess this, the TVA is basically, saying fridging is okay. I guess, but it's, not everything is fridging, obviously, but, it's funny in the context. But, again, in the moment, I was like, oh, okay. All right. So again, a lot of times I think it helps that the cast here delivered the lines with such sincerity and conviction that you were like, all right. All right. So anyway, they get into this fight and so what happened to this Wolverine? Why is he like so hated? So we learned that this Wolverine was on a bender one day, and that's when the humans came for the other X-Men and succeeded for once. And that this Wolverine returned to find the dead bodies of the X-Men. And he flew into such a berserker rage that he not only killed the bad humans, but he killed some good humans as well. Confirming humanity's worst fear about mutants and probably himself, his own worst fears about himself. So yeah, it was pretty bad. So, I also like the reveal. So, so when you drop something like that, when you're like, oh, this guy did something awful, it's hard to deliver on that. But yet I think that the movie did. I also liked the explanation as to why this Wolverine was wearing the yellow and blue suit. And he said it's because he was never willing to wear it before when the X-Men were alive. And I loved his line where he said, God forbid they actually thought I wanted to be there. That was beautiful. That was really great. That he felt such guilt over being too cool for school when he could have been at school. Now he can no longer be in school. But that was great. And he wears it now in honor of the good and the innocence, I think, in some ways. Because, he's wearing this bright yellow and blue suit. What did Deadpool say? Looks like he fights for the Los Angeles Rams or something. That was great. But he wears it now to represent the good, even if he seemed corny. It's not corny, damn it. And that's why he's wearing the suit for the X-Men. And so I thought that was really great. I loved it. He also uses the good of the X-Men to connect with Cassandra Nova to talk her down, saying that if Charles knew who she was and where she was, they would move heaven and earth to rescue her. And that's very possibly true, because the X-Men have a very long track record of not only embracing their enemies, but sometimes joining them. So the X-Men are really fluid in many, many, many ways. And Hugh Jackman's speech, again, was so heartfelt and full of such conviction. I was like, okay, you know what? Let's go with this. All right, so back to the car fight. Loved it. Did you catch that on the radio when they started the music? First, it was that song from Jackman's The Greatest Showman, his song with Zac Efron, one of my favorite songs. The whole soundtrack is fire. But then they settled on You're the One That I Want from Grease, which was not only a great choice for the sequence, but of course, Hugh Jackman has said that he had a big crush on Olivia Newton-John growing up. So that was fantastic. The whole sequence was very inventive and fun, with Deadpool saying, you know what? I love the Honda. Oh, it was great. And then also at the end when Wolverine had tied Deadpool up in all the seatbelts. I mean, it was great. It was really, really great. And also, as nice, the way they set it up, as nice as Wolverine was to Cassandra Nova, saying, we would fight for you, he was just as cruel to Deadpool, which is why they got into that fight in the first place. Like, he was so cruel to Deadpool. Like, wow. Like, he really crossed the line. He jumped over the line. And so when Wolverine finally, finishes his tirade and says, what, now you don't have anything to say? And Deadpool just sits there quietly, and you know that Wolverine went too far. And then Deadpool just looks at him and says, I'm going to fight you now. I mean, I felt what was going on with both of them emotionally so well. It was really a great sequence. Then, of course, the Void Resistance Fighters. Did you catch the Wanda tableau from Multiverse of Madness as the ceiling of their lair? But we have the Void Resistance Fighters, which end up being Elektra. That Ben Affleck Daredevil joke was ice cold. But when you get it, if you weren't keenly aware in some part of your psyche that they have had not a great divorce, in relationship situation. So that was very, very funny. Did you get that joke? Did you pick up on it? My audience was like, ooh, because we laughed, but we were also, like, as I said, ice cold. X-23 was part of this group. Blade, it was so great when he walked out. And I think it was great for Wesley Snipes as well. And then also Gambit, who, of course, at one point was going to be, Channing Tatum was going to be Gambit, but that film never worked out. And I would have to say it's a good thing that it didn't. However, in a 22 Jump Street sort of way, he is the perfect Gambit for a Deadpool movie. The suit looked ridiculous, and that Cajun accent, the whole reason that Channing Tatum wanted to play Gambit was that he said he had a great Cajun accent. So this must not be it. And they were making jokes about it and how it was unintelligible. And it was so funny, though. Channing Tatum, I think, did a great job playing a comedic version of Gambit. I thought it was very funny. And then they take on Cassandra Nova's army of Fox X-Men stand-ins. Yeah, that's not the Azazel, that's not the Juggernaut, and that's not the Lady Deathstrike. But, while it was a little lame, I was just looking at all the cameos that we did get that were very cool. And I felt, were genuine, legit cameos. I liked them. So this was kind of like a mini airport battle from Civil War. But by far and away, the best moves belonged to Gambit. When he shuffled his cards that were all charged up in slow motion, it was a beautiful thing to see. I loved it so much. And then also the way he was using his staff somehow. I've never seen Gambit use his staff that way, that he could charge things by touching them with his staff. Insert Deadpool jokes there, innuendo jokes there. But I thought that, his moves in the fight scene were the best. Then the whole point of this fight was to get the Juggernaut's helmet off of him and onto Cassandra Nova because it would block her powers from her using them outward. I don't know if the helmet works that way. Because then why has nobody put Magneto's helmet on Charles Xavier to shut him down? I don't really think it's a two-way street kind of situation. At least I don't think so. But anyway, whatever. I just let it go because I was having such a good time. However, it turns out the pyro was working not just for Cassandra Nova, but also for Paradox, and he shows up and shoots her while she's wearing the helmet, but you know what? Who cares? I was going to write all this out for you, but I was like, yeah, either you saw the movie or you didn't. Bottom line, to keep, just like the movie kept moving along, this gives Cassandra Nova the motivation, now that she knows that Paradox is working against her, to leave the void and also go after Paradox as Deadpool and Wolverine are, to up the stakes for the third act. Now, the important thing is that this got us to my second favorite sequence in the movie, and that's Deadpool and Wolverine versus the Deadpool Corps. The Deadpool Corps was fine. I think that was Blake Lively's voice as Lady Deadpool, but I don't think she was actually in the suit. It was fine. They had all the Deadpools, and I liked it, but I liked seeing Deadpool and Wolverine slice and dice their way through them. All right, so let's talk about it. So what a scene. Great setup. One of Hugh Jackman's funniest moments was where he used Dogpool as a shield to move to the new location before the fight started. And the way Hugh Jackman just kind of walked across, I thought was very funny. That was very, very funny. I also really liked, as I said, all the interactions with Nicepool throughout the film. But here, especially the reveal that he was the one Deadpool who couldn't regenerate, which our Deadpool, only learned after using him as a human shield. Oopsie. That was very well done. That was funny. But then they came out to fight the Deadpool Corps, and Wolverine put his mask on, and it looked so good. It looked amazing. It looked incredible. And they sliced and diced their way, as I said, through the Deadpool Corps to Madonna's Like a Prayer. That was great. Just an absolutely amazing, perfect action sequences. Through a bus, shout out to Shang-Chi, the other great, fantastic bus action sequence that we've seen recently. But it ended with them bursting out of the back of the bus in slow motion to create that incredibly comics accurate tableau I was talking about in my non-spoiler review. That was just a thing of beauty. Both of their masks on, the glass coming out, slow motion, Wolverine growling. I loved it. I loved it. I loved it. I loved it. It was amazing. Hugh Jackman, as I said, looks so good in that helmet. Way better than I ever would have thought. It's kind of Batman-y with the cowl, but they whited out his eyes. They've never done that with the Batman, really, except for the final armor suit for Batman versus Superman. But, you know, the white looks a little painted on like a Halloween mask to some degree, but I think you need it. I think it would have looked weird with seeing Wolverine's eyes, but it worked. It worked so well because of Hugh Jackman's, the way he moved his mouth and his jawline. It reminded me of Karl Urban, in fact, and the way he wore his Judge Dredd mask so well, even though you couldn't see his eyes. He acted with the lower half of his face, and I felt that Hugh Jackman was doing that as well. In fact, in some shots, like when they were about to go to get that machine, and Hugh Jackman looked back with the mask on and he was talking to Deadpool, he reminded me of some, particularly Joe Madureira's artwork on how Wolverine looked in the cowl. I was like, that's it. That's it. Oh, it was great. Which finally led to taking out, as I said, Paradox's rogue TVA machine, where Deadpool has his big character moment, because early on in the film, he's trying to audition for the Avengers and, for Happy Hogan. I don't know what happened. I don't know how he got into the main Marvel MCU universe. I guess he used Cable's machine. I didn't care. Happy's office was beautiful. I liked the scene very much. I thought it was great. And then he went back, I guess, to his own universe because Happy said no. I liked it when Deadpool was like, "Oh, you're standing up. That's never a good sign," because the meeting's over. So that was great. But what was really important about this, and besides it being a very funny scene, was that Happy said, you're not supposed to join the Avengers because you need it. Deadpool really wanted to impress his girlfriend. He thought they were growing apart. But he said the Avengers, the world, has to need you. And in this case, his world needed Deadpool. And he was willing to sacrifice himself for that, to really go out a hero. So maybe technically to some way he needed it as well. But at least, it was 50-50. I liked when he was doing the gag, past the window, like the stare gag and all the different things. And then first you were like, why are you delaying? And he acknowledged that. And he said, sorry, I guess I'm just really nervous to go die. And, it was funny, but also really got you in the feels as well. You're like, oh. So it should have killed him. It should have killed him stopping the machine, as was explained to us. But Wolverine can't let him do it alone. So they do it together. And by sharing all those whatever were flowing into them from both sides of the machine, they share that trauma, and therefore they manage to survive. Cassandra Nova, though, who was also hooked up to the machine because she was trying to use it for evil, she does not survive. But while they both survive the endeavor, it does blow off Wolverine's shirt, which was hilarious. It was hilarious because not only had they been joking about it, but he looked incredible, as was acknowledged by not only Deadpool, but by that guy who works at the TVA. I mean, wow. Not only because he looked fantastic, but his body was glowing and was all sweaty and it was like literally glistening like in a sci-fi way. I mean, Hugh Jackman, I know it's been tough for him, but his hours in the gym, at 55, he looks incredible. He looks so good. And the MCU beefcake tradition has continued. So that was very funny and also incredible to see. And Deadpool got Nicepool. He got Nicepool's dog, Dogpool. Ryan Reynolds' interactions with that dog were so sweet throughout the film. They were some of the sweetest moments in the movie. You really were, sorry, Nicepool, but you really were rooting for those two crazy kids to get together. And it was just lovely. It was just really, really cute. So I had a great time. I thought it was a fabulous Deadpool and Wolverine story. It really was good. I think that focus, in my opinion, helped the movie. It was a multiverse movie, but it also made fun of multiverse movies. And I thought it was crazy that Deadpool called out how not great the multiverse movies have been. But at the same time, multiverse movies and shows. But at the same time, don't we still have Secret Wars to go? All right. But anyway, it was funny. It was very Deadpool-y. I think that it played very much like a Wolverine. It played very much like in the heyday of Marvel Comics when they were really, really good. They're not so good right now. but it played like a fantastic Deadpool and Wolverine team-up comic. It had, and I had the same feeling of satisfaction when I would finish the film as I would when I would have finished those issues or graphic novel. All right, so more spoiler videos coming this weekend. Until then, share your thoughts down below. Go to town. This is the spoiler video. Subscribe today. And of course, as always, you can check out some more videos right now.